Welcome back, everybody. Two guys and a stack of comics. Sadly, still one guy here. Mike's schedule has not let up as of yet, but we still wanted to make sure we went and brought to you the best new comics of the week. And I will say this was one of the best and I think biggest weeks at the shop in quite a while. We get the launch of a major comic book with Batman #1. Spider-Man hits a huge anniversary issue. Absolute Superman and another #1 Spider-Man book launching as well. And I will say, I think this was the best week at the store for me to personally, and I have 8 total books that I would be recommending this week. Some slightly better than others, and I think one clearly stands out as the best book of the week. But I think a really, really good week across the board, pretty evenly distributed. 3 DC books I thought were great this week, 3 Marvel, and 2 indies that won't probably surprise anybody when you see them. But wanted to discuss those. Kind of start with the marquee book of the week, Matt Fraction, Jorge Jimenez, Batman #1. I think this is a good issue of Batman #1. I think this was a decent starting point. What I will say is it barely makes a recommends for me in this, in that the Jorge Jimenez art carries this issue. The costume redesign with Batman is really, really cool. And I think it is putting things on the board in an interesting place. Again, Jimenez's art, the costume redesign, it's fantastic. I think one of the things about the book that does work is the Batman main title has been in a rough place, I'd say, for a couple of years. And so Tom King's run, I thought it started okay. It really fell off after that whole wedding fiasco. You pivoted to James Tynion, who I just never felt was the right writer for the book. There was some interesting issues, but he kept trying to add these new characters like Ghostmaker and was a Miracle Molly or whatever, characters that we've all kind of forgotten that really didn't make a huge impact. And again, I appreciate they tried to add things in. It didn't really work. And then Chip Zdarsky's run, I thought the first arc really had some potential, setting up some cool threats and things, and all of that, essentially fell apart. And his at the end became really almost unreadable. Hush 2 has been, in my opinion, a disaster. And, part of why we're getting this book in a very weird timing is this was supposed to be a follow up to Hush 2. Obviously, Hush 2 is not finished yet. So the previous volume of Batman will be finishing after this new volume has started. So, with all of that said, here's why I do think this is a pretty decent book. While Matt Fraction's voice for Batman is a little weird at times in this, I do think he touches on a couple of facets of Bruce's personality that struggled in the main book. In that his Batman is suitably cool and menacing, but there is a little bit more humanity to Batman in this issue that I think is pretty cool. And I enjoy when they explore that with Batman and make him a fully faceted character. And where Fraction's run has me somewhat excited. I think Hawkeye is an interesting book. It's one of my favorite runs that he's done. The first few issues of Hawkeye, his run, were not great. It was really once he got rolling and you could tell what he was building that book got going. And so while I don't think this was an amazing debut issue, I am a little underwhelmed as far as, do I think it's oh my gosh, what a starting point? No, but the art is extremely good. And Batman did feel like Batman in a lot of portions of the book where I'm excited to see where it goes. So this, to me, it's a tentative yes, but I think the book has been such in a bad place that I think this is a good step in the right direction. And I would say that's always a good thing to recognize. And I'm excited to see what will happen, especially with Jimenez on art. So I understand some of the critiques of the book, but I think for a #1 issue, for where it's at, I think it's interesting. I think it ended up in a decent place. I know there'll be critics of it. And again, I don't think it's a perfect comic, but I do think it's worth checking out if you want a good starting place for Batman. And I think the book did a decent job there. Next 2 DC books I'll kind of pivot to, I can recommend with a lot more sort of emphasis behind it. Adventures of Superman #1, Book of L. Philip Kennedy Johnson returning to write Superman. His Action Comics run was really the lone bright spot for Superman in the previous years before the Josh Williamson sort of relaunch on it. That was, of course, at the time where they had John Kent occupying the main Superman title. This book largely kind of just picks up with what Kennedy Johnson was building. And I think for him, he's such a good writer. He's done a great job on his Batman and Robin run. His Hulk run has been hit or miss, but I think the writing's been pretty consistent there. He just has a really good voice, I think, for Superman and Superman's world. So I thought this was a great introductory issue, set up a lot of things that I think will be interesting to see with this kind of invasion of Earth and sort of picking up on where his run left off. I just think this was a kind of a frenetic book. It had a lot of good energy behind it, and it was interesting. There was some cool character moments for Clark Kent. And so overall, I think this was a really solid issue. I think it's Godlewski on the art on it. Overall, really good. I'm excited to see where that goes. I think if you missed Philip Kennedy Johnson on Superman, you'll be excited to see that. And if you haven't checked out his run on Action Comics, I think you'll really enjoy that if you want some solid Superman storytelling. So I think great book. I think this would be the DC comic book that I enjoyed most this week. Last DC recommendation, Absolute Superman number 11, Jason Aaron, and on this book. And Absolute Superman's an interesting book in that I actually like the plot. I enjoy the pieces that are there. For Absolute, I kind of have to accept that this is not really Superman. And so your mileage is going to vary. If you're willing to read a different version of Clark Kent who almost seems to have nothing to do with the mainstream counterpart, I think you can enjoy the book. I think it's a fun comic. I think it's got a lot of twists and turns. I like the way they've integrated both Talia and Ra's al Ghul into the book. Lois Lane's put on the board in a very interesting place in this. I think this book, a couple issues, you'll kind of cross where I'm just enjoying the book as it is. Again, if you're a diehard Superman fan who only wants to see Superman as the big blue Boy Scout, and I do not blame anybody for wanting that, you're going to be disappointed with this book in that it doesn't seem like it's ever going to veer towards that. And I think one of the reasons Absolute Batman's been really good is that's been very close to mainstream counterpart Batman. He's a little more brutal, but there's the essence of the character. I think, if you did like a Venn diagram, the majority of the essence of Batman would be there. Whereas Superman, it's not really close. And so I think it's just going to depend on how well you enjoy the story Jason Aaron's crafting. I think he's done a pretty good job with it so far. I really enjoyed the book, but I understand from Superman purists who just want him to be as he is or as he was in the movie, where you wouldn't love it. But I think it's absolutely worth checking out. It's a good story on its own. And I think in a market where we have some strong Superman books like what Josh Williamson's doing, I think there's room for a book like this on the shelves. So overall, I would recommend that one as well. Give it over to the Marvel end of things. Book I was probably more excited for even than Batman number 1, which is really hard to imagine given how much I love Batman. But Spider-Man 94, number 1, continuing off of the beloved Spider-Man cartoon of the 90s. J.N. DeMatteis writing this one. I think this was just a great and fun issue. It was so nice to be back in the world of that cartoon, to kind of capture the aesthetics of it. I think Jim Toh was the artist on this. I will say the art is not anything to kind of write home on, but I do think it does capture enough of the essence of what the TV show had. And so I think that was pretty cool. There are a few times where Peter Parker or Spider-Man kind of looks a little weird in the book, but I think the art's okay. We get the introduction of kind of the Moreland character from Spider-Man comics into the 94 series, which obviously would have been impossible given when he was created. But I think they're setting up an interesting story. I really enjoyed the heck out of it. J.M. DeMatteis really has a good voice for Peter Parker. I think this was a fun comic. And I think Spider-Man fans who have been really disappointed with the book in the last couple of years, you see all the classic elements that you want. We don't get answers to the cliffhanger of this. They do seem to hint that we will see eventually how he found Mary Jane, the cliffhanger the show ended. But this was just a really nice book to pick up. I really enjoyed the heck out of it. And I think if you're a fan of that cartoon, you really liked it too. Really solid week for Spider-Man. I think Spider-Man number 11 or 975. I will say price point on this a bit high, $7.99. You do get quite a bit out of this. Step into spoilers a little bit on this one, so if you don't want to find anything about the book, I'll kind of put timestamps in here where you can sort of skip. But there's been this mystery kind of setting up of a fake Peter Parker running around and a Spider-Man who's not Peter Parker running around, and the kind of mystery of what happened to Peter. I think they handled that really well. And what I want to say for Joe Kelly on this book is I think sometimes the Zeb Wells run and a lot of what preceded it really hit people the wrong way. And it's sort of like when a movie franchise is in a bad place and the fan base is really angry. It's so hard to get people to change their perspective on it. And I'll say, I don't think Joe Kelly handled the first few issues of this series very well. But I think from issue, I want to say 8 through where we're at 9, which is only 4 issues, right? So this could obviously go up. He crafted a really great story with 8 with the fight with Peter and Hellgate. the fallout and the aftermath of that, I think, has been really interesting to read. And so to reveal that the Peter Parker that's running around is obviously Ben Reilly, and to have Norman Osborn, who's been in this really interesting place, is this more menacing Spider-Man who's running around, and in a way trying to honor Peter's legacy. I think it's just a really interesting play. I think it's putting the pieces on the board in a really interesting way. One of the things I appreciate out of this, and I think Joe Kelly's doing well, while I don't love that Ben Riley's become this chasm character, and I don't know how I feel about Norman Osborn being redeemed, I think if those two character changes have happened, this is a heck of a way to put those on the board in an interesting way, where as a reader it's engaging and you really don't know what's going to happen. And I respect the fact that he is honoring the continuity of what came before with those stories. While I eventually hope maybe he'll retcon and put some of the things back as it is, one thing that I don't want to be hypocritical on is we often complain about writers not sticking with changes that have happened and therefore events not mattering. And so I do like that he's honoring what happened with Ben, whether I feel that's a good choice or a bad choice. I appreciate that he's dealing with it, and I appreciate what he did with Norman Osborn. We also ended up finding out where Peter Parker is, and he was kind of sent into space and had been surviving on his own. And we get this interesting sort of kind of team up with this scientist type character who's found Peter in space and is trying to help develop him. Really strong character moments for Peter Parker at the end of this. I think the art was really good. You get Pepe Larraz, John Romita Jr. on this. Overall, I think this was a really fun issue. I thought there were some great moments in it, and it's good to see Amazing Spider-Man, in my opinion, at least taking some steps in the right direction. Am I prepared to say the series is back on track? No, but 4 good issues in a row is a really good starting place, and more than we've seen from Spider-Man in a while. So I think if you want something that's a bit game changing, kind of throws you in a different direction, I think it's an interesting place to be. I'll also say, if you watch the channel, we did a video, and mainly me. I don't want to play Mike on that. Mainly me. We covered this kind of crossover with 2 Spider-Mans, one a cosmic Spider-Man, the other here, and I was really negative on it. And it's one of the things where sometimes when you are in a negative place, you prejudge things, and I was wrong on it thus far. And I think they've actually handled it well, put things interesting. And so I love being proven wrong. I hope it continues to be a good book. It's entertaining and enjoyable. It's just great to have ASM on the list and enjoy the book again. And I think if you give it a chance and kind of at least pick up these last 4 or 5 issues, you might enjoy Spider-Man again. Last couple books. Moon Knight Fist of Khonshu, number 12, Jed MacKay, Carbone on the art on this. Again, cool thing with Jed MacKay, being a writer who's been on a book for a long time, we get some of the benefits that we don't get out of a lot of titles now. And that MacKay's been writing the book, I want to say, for almost 4 or 5 years at this point. One of the cool things that he's been able to do is there's been events that have happened that were revisited, 1 or 2 years ago that he could have there. So one of the interesting things that he did is when Mark Spector was technically dead, the character, the Wrecker, was responsible for helping revive him and helping save Khonshu, which ended up, freeing Mark Spector. And so there's a great little team up here between Moon Knight and the Wrecker. Moon Knight feels like he owes him. I think it was just a cool team up. It's interesting, and what I really loved about this, it was great to be reading a comic book in the modern age where it was pulling from events a couple of years ago, written by the same writer, and actually sort of having some building blocks where it's like, wow, and you figure out how cool it was to read a comic book where the same creative's been in charge for a while, and actually see some things with some payoff and revisiting those events. And so I thought this was a really fun and interesting issue. Cool little cliffhanger at the end. It kind of shows the complicated thing of when you get involved with the villain, with the Wrecker. Overall, he just has a great voice for Moon Knight. This was a really entertaining book. I would highly recommend checking out the Moon Knight comic book. And if you haven't read Jed MacKay's run, I would recommend trying to catch up on it if possible. It's been going for a while, but I think if you've been a little down on mainstream comics, that's one more read. Last 2 books I'll get to, and I think the best 2 books of the week come out of the indie space. Mad Cave Comics, Flash Gordon, number 11, Jeremy Adams and Will Conrad on this. This book continues to just be fantastic. It's the second best ongoing comic book, in my opinion, behind Conan the Barbarian. We get some cool little multiversal things in this, but contained enough where it's not the mess of a multiverse that Marvel and DC have. you largely have an evil version of Flash Gordon and a heroic version of Flash Gordon clashing, and with Ming thrown in and Dale thrown in. It's just a fun comic book, and what I think they've done a great job with this book is it's just an old sci-fi adventure story. It kind of reminds me of those cheap paperback sci-fi novels that you used to be able to pick up and just kind of get captured into those stories for a little bit. It's fun, it's energetic, it's got great storytelling pieces to it, and it's not trying to overthink what it's trying to do. It's just making an entertaining Flash Gordon comic. Also, heck of a cliffhanger at the end with kind of having it seem that Flash Gordon's been thrown into this multiverse or this different universe where he was evil. And so we've got the heroic one sort of facing off there. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. But this has been such a pleasant surprise from Mad Cave, and it continues to be a really great comic. Last book and book of the week, Savage Sword of Conan. Number 10 on this one. You get Jim Zub writing this one. You have art in this from both Doug Brathwaite and Rob Del Torre. You get a fantastic Conan story at the beginning. And again, this is one of the things of Conan very similarly to Moon Knight, because Zub's been on this book for a while. The Conan story that we get in here with the exceptional art from Doug Brathwaite, with a lot of action, great fight scenes, different things that are going on in here, of course, brought to you in that great black and white pencils that Savage Sword always brings. The cool thing is he's touching on issues that have happened before. You're seeing events from a few issues ago put together, and all of this building towards this, Scourge of the Serpent kind of thing that he's doing. And I just, it's such a joy to read a book that has things plotted out, that has the events that matter, that has building blocks that are in there. It really seems like Conan is playing chess when everyone else is playing checkers as far as how the book is structured and what they're doing. It's just a fantastic comic. There's also some cool kind of backstory ones here as well. You get Rob De La Torre's art with a Sailor Steve Costigan story. I'll be honest, I only had ever heard of the character. I know he was an early creation of Howard's, but really cool that they added that in there. And I think that's one thing that Titan and Heroic Signatures do such a good job at, is just finding these characters from Robert E. Howard's work and honoring that and making sure they create stories that fans of those characters would love. And so it's just a different quality of book that Titan's putting out with everything Conan. The art is top notch, the storytelling is top notch. Here you get these cool pinups and different things in here. Savage Sword's book of the week. It's an absolute pleasure to read this book every month. It reminds me of why you go to the store to buy comics every time I pick one of these up, and that it's just such a fun adventure. But that would be the books of the week. I think one of the best and maybe the most comics I've ever had to recommend within 1 week. Let me know, what did you think down below? If you agree or disagree, folks, completely okay. I'd really be interested in folks' thoughts on Batman #1. Again, I don't think it was an amazing book, but I think it was a solid first step. But whether you agree or disagree, I'd love to see what you think down below. As always, folks, thank you for watching. God bless you. Enjoy some football this weekend and have a great rest of your day.